again. Welcome to another edition of Chicago Crossing Model Railroad at the Bench. Eric here with you with an assortment of railroad car models. Anyway, I've been pretty busy, not doing model railroading the last couple of weeks, but before that I posted a little bit about the weathering process that went into taking a relatively ordinary and a bit boring looking Illinois Central Gulf bulkhead flat car model and then turning it into something that I'm happy to have occupying track space on the layout. I didn't shoot video for this. It was kind of, other than what you saw just on the rainy day video, it was kind of just a process for me, just to kind of go back to basics and reconnect with an art that I haven't engaged in a little while. But it turned out great. And that got me to thinking it would be lovely to do a series on railcar weathering. If you go on YouTube, you have seen tons of content on railcar weathering. And so what I want to do instead is spend a little bit of time before I actually get into the painting process and just talk about the thought process that goes behind this. So what you see laid out in front of you are 4 different models, 2 bulkhead flats, 2 boxcars. And I think each of them represents a distinctive sort of philosophical bent toward model railroad weathering, railcar weathering. And in the back here, this is a Milwaukee Road boxcar. This is an Intermountain model. And it's a really nice high cube double door boxcar here. This one I had painted specifically to look like the prototype photos. Every now and again, for me, it's a real pleasure to actually pull up a photo of a specific railcar model and then to make the model reflect what that prototype looks like. But, more commonly, what I prefer is actually to take an approach like I used for this railcar here, which is basically the approach of a composite of many different cars. In this particular case, I don't know that I was able to find a specific photo of this prototype, but I found photos of cars that are pretty much just like this. And what it provided for me was an opportunity to basically take a lot of different techniques and kind of explore them in one model. I had done this car a number of years ago, and in one case I wanted to basically show the fouling of the paint on the galvanized roof on top here, using my first time doing the kind of fumi method with water to create these sort of rust pools, where there's low spots. There's bits of sponge-based chipping up here, and other bits and pieces to just kind of work out that roof. And then down here, some of my first experiments with oil paints and pastels, experiments with graffiti decals, and also experiments with basically, trying to blotch out or scrape away, lettering decals like one might see. It's not a perfect car by any means, but I've got to say, it's a wonderful rail car. And as a composite of a lot of different versions of this particular car, I think that's a lot of fun. This one fits somewhere in between. It's actually painted pretty much identically to IHB 17-021, which is a bulkhead flat. I had also picked up these ITLA wooden decks, and these, by the way, are a beautiful product if you want to put wooden decking on a bulkhead flat car. A lot of things on here reflect the prototype, like this yellow paint patch here, a little bit of graffiti there, kind of the overall color of the road dirt on the car and stuff like that. So I think when we do when we take on the art of weathering, we're usually sitting somewhere in between the continuum of these 3 ideas here, either something that's prototypical, something that's truly a freelance composite, or something that maybe contains elements of both in order to achieve what we're looking for. So I wanted to talk a little bit about factory weathered railroad car models. I'm going to go on record and say, there's nothing wrong with getting a pre-weathered model rail car. If weathering is not your thing, then sure, go for it. I own a number of them. I actually use them as inspiration. That kind of helps me up my own game in terms of weathering, because you have now not just a photograph, but also a three-dimensional model that allows you to understand a little bit more about how specific weathering processes might actually be applied to a model of this size. So that three-dimensionality, I think, is really, really great. So what I've set up here is I've set up two pairs of N-scale models. One model is a microtrains model. The other model is one that I've weathered. And, of course, the question is, can you tell the difference? The fair answer, I think, at least the answer I give is, of course I can. The back two cars here are both microtrains models. The front two are models that I have weathered by hand. And so what are the differences between them? Well, the one thing you're always going to get with a factory applied printing on top of a model is you're going to get a high level of precision, and it's going to look exactly like the photo of the prototype that was given to microtrains, or that microtrains scouted out in order to make these models. So yeah, absolutely. You can tell the difference if you look at these, at more than just a glance. Both of these are actually models that I weathered very early on in my model railroading career. This one is from about 2018. This one is from 2020. One can go on and on about the differences here in terms of these, still have a satin-like new finish, and so it doesn't look like a flat, dusty car. And that is true. I don't think that when you hold this up to a light and you see how everything shines, including the, rust spots and stuff like that, that's necessarily what you would anticipate from a prototypical model. But that's also an easy fix. And so for me, I'm not going to hate on the models just for that purpose. What I will say, though, is not anything against these sort of models, but simply as a way of speaking in favor of doing this approach and just weathering them yourselves. And it's this. Microtrains will produce a certain number of models that look like this of certain types, but they will never produce this model. And this boxcar is actually, oh God, about 40 years old. This is really, really old stuff. This was the first railcar model that I ever owned as a little kid. I went to a hobby store. My dad was with me, and I looked at that car. I loved the color of blue it was, and so I said, Dad, could I use my allowance on that? And he said, sure. And so I bought this car. Did not have a locomotive, no track to run it on. I just loved the model. And, I kept it to this day. You can tell the stirrups have long broken off and need some, etched brass replacements on there. But if I showed this to you, you would have no idea that this was a 40-year-old model, most likely. This was painted also and decaled based on a prototype photo that I saw of a former Rock Island boxcar. But there's only one of these in the world, and it's on my layout. And, I think that is the extra bit of motivation for not sort of becoming cynical and saying, well, if microtrains can do something with this level of precision, what is the point of me ever modeling a rail car or weathering a rail car of my own? Why not just buy all these? And the answer is because this is a work of art. This is mass produced. And, outsider looking in, maybe there's not a lot of difference to that. Maybe this one's less precise, but to me, this means a lot. And that's why I model railroad. It's for me. That's what our hobbies are for. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what I call the concept of inspired fantasy when it comes to weathering and customizing railroad car models. And I guess what I mean by that is, a model railroad is essentially a collision between the real world and the prototype world that we seek to model with modeling, rolling stock and weathering rolling stock. I think a lot of the same sorts of things apply. Again, if your philosophy is not to try to consistently replicate one car in one way, just the way it is out on the road, then you get freed up to do a lot of really interesting and creative things that are still plausible and still fit within the story of your layout's timeline, but that aren't necessarily constrained with the idea that they had to exist in the first place. This is one of my favorite model railroad cars. I even painted the wooden decking inside of this thing. This is a Microtrains rail car. It's basically just it was originally a Penn Central model. But in the timeline of my railroad, Penn Central doesn't exist anymore. It became part of Conrail. And so I did some searching and saw at least one example of a boxcar that just had the Penn Central logo and Penn Central name essentially patched out, and then was listed as a Conrail car. And they did the exact minimum necessary in order to do that, which means they simply painted over PC and put CR there with the appropriate decaling and the Conrail paint color. And so basically what I did with this boxcar, in addition to just detailing the roof, is I went ahead and did that exact same patching over on this model. And, same deal on this side as well. Added in all the rust, streaking, grime, dirt, etc. And now this is a really one-of-a-kind model. I've seen Microtrains sell kind of a pre-weathered version that looks something like this, a former Penn Central. But this is my Penn Central, or former Penn Central model. And I love the way it looks. And that's the thing that you really get out of weathering cars. It's not just about replicating reality in terms of how a rail car looks after a certain amount of time or a certain amount of abuse or somebody graffitied on it or whatever. It's really creating these kind of one-of-a-kind works that you can call your own and that reflect your own vision for your layout's story, and that create a story for themselves. This car, you can look at it and it's got a story to it. It's tempting when you first take airbrush or pastel or oil paint or whatever to a specific model to kind of go all the way and turn them all into a rust bucket or something like that. But if you think about how cars are on a railroad, they all have a different story and sort of different life experience, so to speak. And so for me, the way I approach this from kind of a philosophical standpoint is I approach every car not just with the intention to weather, but kind of an intention of what I want to get out of the weathering process. And sometimes cars actually are examples of where I simply am in my process of continuing the evolution of my own model working skills. Like this one is a good example. If you've seen previous videos, I think it was a while back, I did a video where I basically just tested out different little markers and things like that for weathering, adding graffiti to rail cars. So this car had previously just gotten a couple of washes that didn't look particularly amazing, but then I used it as a canvas to try to test out some different new things that I had, or new tools that I had picked up in order to weather rail cars. And in the process of doing so, it just added a lot of little subtleties and interesting bits to this car to where I don't really feel like I need to go any further. Not every rail car that you're going to see is going to be intensively weathered. And then likewise, for this one, this was mostly a test bed for just a couple of new techniques that I wanted to try, specifically with respect to paint fading on this type of blue car, adding in little details in terms of paint chipping on the ribbing, and also what the heck to do with these big yellow hood covers. And so I think it's just fine to take a bit of an incremental approach to any given rail car and say, well, I want this car to look a certain way, but I also recognize that I can use this as an opportunity to practice something on this car and get good at it because this car lends itself really well to maybe using that technique. What's going to happen when you weather, practice weathering rail cars is it literally is that. It's practice. It's getting good at it, and it's trying new things. And so it's okay if what you end up with are some models that you favor more than others. I've got models sitting in my drawer here that are not my best work and probably not my favorites. But for me, this is all just, kind of a pleasure to be able to try something new on a model and to explore, whether or not that thing works, and then to continue to improve as I go. The last point is that exploration need not be perfection. And again, this comes up again and again. If I had messed up this graffiti, you know what I would have done is I would have taken tape and then airbrushed in a patch. It's as simple as that. There's really no downside to taking an approach, even if it feels like kind of a gradual one, to just building up the skill sets to be able to do this if you aspire to it. If where you get in this hobby and in this part of the hobby is basically adding some road dust onto a car or trying to flatten it out a little bit or adding bits and pieces of something, and that makes you happy and you feel like you're in a good place with it, that's great. Nobody's telling you to do more. I think for me, what I've really enjoyed about this entire process is basically learning new aspects of art as I go. It's either something you really love to do or it's something you don't. And that's fine. The hobby's for everybody. So with all that, the big question, of course, is, well, what's actually up for weathering? And, I'm kind of going to go in order of rear to front here. So let me just spin the turntable round. First off, I'm going to kind of finish my series of bulkhead flat cars. I've got this Norfolk Southern model. And, this one needs, I think, a lot of work to really, boost it to being a nice prototypical looking model. Based off of the features of the composite of photos I've picked out, I'm going to be not using the wooden decking that's molded in here. It's kind of bad looking. I don't know that these little circles here necessarily correspond to something real. I'm not sure if that's injection molding or if that's actually supposed to be on those decks, but I am going to put down a wooden deck on that. Then I've got this, what can only be described as ultra boring Illinois Central rail car in, Bert the Muppet gray, pigeon gray, or whatever you want to call it. This thing, if you put it on a railroad, it exudes literally no personality. And I bought it actually precisely for that reason, is I figured this would be a great car to serve as a challenge to see, if we take a pretty good rail car, this is an exact rail, it's got nice metal wheels, it's decent detail. Can we actually turn this into something that would really stand out on the layout? So the last car here is kind of the piece de resistance. It is this hot metal torpedo car. This is pretty much the identical model of car that runs through the southern Chicago area. And, I've got a couple of pewter models that I've run on the layout before for my hot metal train. This thing takes the cake, though, because this is actually the identical car with the, Buckeye truck on the outer side and then the four-wheel trucks on the inner. Also comes with the lid here. This is a 3D printed resin model. I'll put some information on where I got this because it really is just a beautiful model. It's already been primed in Vallejo black, so it's basically ready to go. And since I spent all the time doing those ladles for Finkel steel, I think I've got a good idea as to how I'm going to actually approach this rail car here. So what that means is Chicago Crossing is going to be bringing to you some weathering videos. And, as I specified before, it's not going to be a how-to. You can find all sorts of those. Rather, it's basically just going to be a fun exploration of the art. I'm going to take you through how I do these and some of the issues that arise as I go about trying to make these into individual works of art with graffiti and detailing and stuff like that. So I hope you'll join over the next coming months as I kind of take these things on, especially this one. This will be a blast. I've never seen anybody do one of those on YouTube, so it'll be a lot of fun. Anyway, with that, we'll just close out. Hope you have a good rest of the weekend and a good rest of the week, and talk to you soon.